Alright, so I'm jumping back into my scene here, and where we left off was we just had a clay rendering of our scene. So we've got a little bit of a camera setup with some lights, with the proper lighting and shadows. We've got ambient occlusion on in our render settings to give a little bit of shadowing in some of our geometry. So, oops, let me close that. So at this point, I would say I'm happy, or I'm at least relatively happy with my scene as far as placement and stuff. I can always change stuff later, but it's a good idea to get to at least a point where you're happy enough to proceed before you embark on this UV mapping journey. So for the first step, what I'm going to do, and I think it's just a best practice. In Photoshop, you guys learned ways to work non-destructively, so that way you can go back and make changes. You're not necessarily committed if you make a mistake or if you change your mind. So I like to work like that in 3D whenever I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make actually a copy of my bottle, because what I'm going to have to do is, so I'm going to make a copy and turn it off and hide it, because I have to make my bottle editable actually. So as some of you guys learned when you were playing around with your splines, when you were first doing the sweep on your objects, you can you know, if you still have the spline and the sweep, you can still make changes to your object. You know, if I wanted to alter the shape of my bottle, I could make it fatter, for example. Once you go past this point, you won't be able to, at least very easily. So I'm going to make my bottle editable. So now I've just got a piece of geometry. So from here, it would be pretty tough to at least smoothly change the shape of my bottle. So let's jump into the layout. So up in the top right-hand corner, what you'll want to do is change it to BP UV Edit, which is the third one on the list. And this will probably be pretty hard to follow along. I would definitely just try to take as many notes as you can and then watch the lecture, which I'll upload tonight when I get home. Because there's a lot here that you guys unfortunately haven't really been able to experience yet, and so it's going to be real easy to miss one step, and then from then on you're kind of derailed when it comes to following. So alright, so if you're gonna take notes, basically step one is make your object editable and switch to the UV edit mode, or the UV edit layout. It's okay. Alright, so that's step one. So in this UV edit mode, we've still got our viewport, but you'll notice that our objects panel moved. It's now down here in the bottom left. And on the right here, we've got a whole bunch of new stuff. There's new buttons all along the top here, but some of them are familiar. We've still got our model select, polygon select, edge select right up here. And then to the left of these, we've got some objects that kind of look familiar, but they aren't quite familiar. We'll get into those briefly. So to begin UV mapping, the first, I guess the second step would be so now you've got a UVW tag on your object, whereas before this is probably a tag that you either haven't realized is there or you haven't been able to figure out what it does. It's kind of this white and black checker. So to get that to do anything, for us, what we have to do is we have to click it and drag it up into our upper right hand menu. And so this is the UV, this is basically the UV editing panel. I don't know if there's a formal name for it, but you can zoom in and move around holding Alt just like you would kind of in the scene. So this doesn't really look like much, it just kind of looks like a bunch of lines and dots and stuff. But what this is if I now switch to my UV polygon selection tool, which are these three. So I've got my normal polygon selection tool, which you guys know this button. And so over here we can kind of see that there's something lit up. So what all these squares and lines and all this other junk over here means, or it corresponds to pieces of your geometry. Different polygons, different lines, etc. So if I switch to the polygon select and I just kind of click and highlight all these, I can see that I just highlighted this ring around this bottle, which looks like probably the prime real estate for where I would want to put my label. If you think of a standard beer bottle, and I will just open up my beer bottle reference. This pretty much looks like where I would want to put my label, more or less. But one thing we'll notice, and so I'm going to kind of jump backwards. What you'll want to do, I guess, whatever the next step 3 maybe, will be to make a new material. And so this menu is kind of, it's the material menu, but it looks and it's laid out a little bit differently than the normal material window. So don't get too worried if it's kind of confusing. You can always just switch back to the standard layout for the time being. So in this second material, I'm going to name this checker, C-H-E-C-K-E-R. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to apply a white and black checker pattern to this. And we'll see what that's for pretty shortly. So to apply the checker pattern, here on the color texture slot, I'm going to click the little arrow, and all the way down here on surfaces, I'm going to apply a checkerboard. So you'll see on our little material dot, this kind of looks like a checker. And if I click into this, on the U and V frequency, I'm just going to raise these probably to like 5 by 5, just so that the checkering is a little bit more dense. It's a little easier to see when you've got more checkers. Because if you kind of think over to our Google image example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this checker material to the bottle just so that I can get a look at kind of what the bottle looks like. So let's do that. Let's apply it. Can apply it pretty straightforwardly. I can just select my model mode, select my bottle, and just apply my checker material to the bottle. And you can see if I open this checkerboard, you'll see that this checkerboard looks a lot more dense. There's a lot more repetitions to the patterns versus what it looks like on my bottle. And additionally, the checkers are square, as you would kind of imagine. And on the bottle, they're not square. They're all very rectangular. And what this means is our UVs are stretched. And this is why if you think back to the desk and the title assignments, if you maybe were lucky and you got to use the UV mapping mode on your texture slot and it looked okay, but I know some of you guys definitely had it where it looked maybe like too stretched. Like if you were using a wood grain, it might have made the wood grain look really, really long or really, really wide. It's because it was doing something like this. It wasn't like nice and even and square. So jumping back to the UV edit mode, if I select these, so what we can see is these shapes over here that correspond to our different polygons, these are a lot wider and shorter when they should be taller and skinnier. If you look at this kind of from top to bottom, these aren't shaped the way that these are shaped, and we want them to be shaped correctly, so that way we're able to apply our image properly. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select some of the polygons on my bottle that kind of correspond to basically this middle cylinder part. If you think of this bottle as kind of just an evenly shaped cylinder, basically from here down through here. This is more or less what I'm going to try to select on my bottle. So I'm going to use our loop select, which we know all well, UL, and oops. So I'm going to select these polygons. So I'm going to start kind of like up here, select all these. And it's important to note, in the instance of a bottle, at least for me, the label is applied to the outside perimeter of the glass. There's no label on the inside. So I only have to UV map what is going to have a label on it, if that makes sense. So in this case, I only have to do the outside. If I zoom in into the inside of my bottle, I mean, there's an inside world in here, but I don't need to select any of this because I'm just going to put a glass material on this. I'm not going to put a label here. So why do something that you don't need to, interfere with or take your time away? One of those kind of thinking smarter, not working harder, whatever examples. So with these selected, I've got this kind of weird hodgepodge of UVs selected. What I want to do is I want to grab the scale tool, which is up here, and if you click and hold, you can switch to the non-uniform scale tool, and that's an important distinction, because I know that at least for my bottle in the shape that it's in right now, mine are too tall. They're not proportioned the same way, so I want to scale up and down and left and right differently. If I just use the normal scale tool and click in, the normal scale tool. So it's important to, when you're scaling your UVs, not make the mistake that I just made. You want to be on the UV polygon edit button right here. So with the scale tool, I can click and drag in here, and you can see I'm making, by scaling this upwards, I'm making more checkers fit onto my bottle, but they're still the wrong proportion, as I was saying. So I'm going to undo and switch back to the non-uniform scale tool. And what this will allow me to do is shrink these vertically. So I'm just clicking, left-clicking and dragging almost straight downwards, and you can see that if I if I just turn off my lights, so as I look at this, as I'm scaling these kind of downwards, they're beginning to look a little bit more square-shaped. At least the checkers themselves. So now this is like kind of small, and what's important is, and if we jump back to our Google image, our character example, so this, it's a little hard to see, but the UV map extends from right down here, where it's kind of a darker brown, all the way up to the upper left. So this is a square, and you see how efficiently they are using, like they're packing and cramming in every little bit, and kind of maximizing how large each little thing is so that they can capture more detail. They're not just cramping this whole character down to like one corner or one piece, whereas if I look at my currently selected polygons, they're all kind of jammed into one little section. They're not using this whole space we've got to work with, which is inefficient. You want to work as efficiently as you can and kind of maximize what you'll get out of your texture. So to make these larger, to scale this back up so that it fits quite large and quite nicely, is it that one? Nope. Nope. There we go. Wait. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. So I will just switch back to the normal scale tool. That's the, I was skipping a step ahead. So just switching back to the normal scale tool, what I'm going to kind of do is scale these up a little bit. And it'll probably, it's a little hard to see up on the projector, but you'll definitely see it real clearly when you're working on your screen, is there's a very clear defined bottom and top edge. So you'll want to kind of scale up, you want to scale up what you've got selected so that it basically fills up like kind of as much as you can. Or I think you can hit the realign button, and you can make sure the first and third buttons are checked, because those are important to have these checked this specific way, and then you can hit apply. And what you'll do, or what you'll see, is this will it'll pretty much maximize, it'll keep it constrained to the same proportion. It's not going to stretch stretch my checker pattern, but it's just going to fill up kind of as much as it can in the space I'm giving it. So with that being said, one thing that's important to notice is, if we jump back to our Google image, is nothing over here overlaps. At least in this particular texture map, it's important to not overlap stuff. If you want a label or some sort of design to appear on one part of the object, you want that part of the UV area to be unique. And what I mean by that is you don't want anything else underneath it or above it. So if I can invert my selection by hitting U, and conveniently invert is the I command. So what I just did is I selected all the other parts of my bottle that weren't the label, or weren't where I was going to put the label, and you can see that if I just kind of move this out of the way, you can see that this part right here was overlapping, and some of these ones over here were overlapping, because the area of my label kind of comes out through here. And so you want to get rid of that overlapping, and nope, not apply, nope, nope. So because we're not going to put a texture on these, we can just scale these down, and so we can just go to the scale tool, scale them kind of small, and move them out of the way. Because the reason this is so important is because I want to put my label that I'm making in Photoshop, I want to put my label within here, and I don't want that to show up on like some weird other part of the bottle. I don't want my label to show up like on the inside or like up on the top or whatever. So I'm just going to tuck the rest of these UVs kind of in the corner, get them out of the way. So now you're probably wondering, well, what does this really tell me, or what do I really do with this? Because right now we've prepared our UV map. As far as UV mapping it goes, we're done. It's just a matter of now working with our texture and kind of getting this data into Photoshop in some way that it kind of makes sense, and we can start working with it. So to do that, what you want to do is click File, New Texture, and on this little texture you can just call it UV Snapshot. So the UV snapshot, or just UV map, or anything really. This is just going to save a file to your computer, but you want to name it something that's coherent that you can recognize. And then on our width and height, so this is a 1K texture. So this is 1024 by 1024. In this case, I think we can step it up to a 2K texture, and that is 2048. So 2048 by 2048. DPI of 72 is fine. You can kind of skip all the color junk. And you want to make sure the background you make a black, just a pure 0% black is fine. Then you can click OK, and you can see that this thing kind of went black. So that didn't mean that it filled the texture in with black. It's just kind of the background. So now the next step is we want to hit Layer, and then down here towards the bottom, it's Create UV Mesh Layer. So this is the super important, most important button, the Create UV Mesh button. And when you click it, it will kind of look weird. Chances are it'll look pretty weird, but if I zoom in, it's going to kind of still look weird over here. But if I switch to the Layers tab, what you can see is I had that black background, but now I've got another layer, and this works, just much like a Photoshop layer, layers palette would. You've got a UV mesh layer, and it's kind of hard to see. The reason the computer's freaking out is because these lines are basically perfectly on top of each other, so it doesn't know how to show. Doesn't know how to show that. But with that being made, all you have to do is just click File, Save Texture, and you can save it out as TIFF with PSD layers. That's fine. And then this is going to try to save it somewhere. So we want to save it into our project folder, and I'm going to make a folder called text. And then in text, I'm going to save my UV snapshot file. And so now, in text, should be able to open this with Photoshop. And of course, it's not a default. Alright, so in Photoshop now, we've got some layers, and so what this is we've got just our black background layer, and then we've got this white this white kind of lined layer. And what this is this is an exact copy of what you just saw in the UV menu. And the reason we tried so hard to resize the shapes of that checker pattern so that it's not stretched is so that way you can just drop your texture in here and it will show up and it won't be stretched. If I hadn't of changed the shape of those UV polygons, what would have happened is when I pull in my design, which is in this case a circle, it would have either been like a really tall oval or a really fat wide oval. I'm not quite sure, but I want it to be a circle, not an oval. I just want to drop it in and just be able to kind of not think about it too much. So with that being said, I've got the start of my label here. I kind of wrote out this kind of title of like a fake beer and made some designs and stuff in Illustrator. So what I can do is I can save this as, or actually I can just duplicate this layer. Duplicate into the UV snapshot. So, all right, cool. I've got this smart object now, which was my Illustrator file, and I can bring this in and just kind of try to center it. And chances are the first time you bring it in, bring your image in, it won't. Something will be weird. Like it's very rare that you'll nail it like first time. So we're just gonna kind of drop this in and see what happens. My trained eyes can already spot what's wrong, but I just want to kind of go through this to show you guys that it can be a tricky process. Oops. So I don't want to. I want to save as. Bottle label texture version 1. And I can save it as a TIFF, that's fine. Oops. Actually, before I save it, I want to uncheck the UV mesh background, or the UV mesh layer in the background. I just want to save out just my image. Basically, I'm just using these as placement reference. You don't want to actually save these out, because you don't want these like white lines probably to be applied to your bottle or to your glass or whatever. You just want them there as reference. So I'm going to turn those off, and then now I'm going to save it as bottle label texture version 1. Save it as a TIFF, that's fine. You can keep the layers and just keep all this the same, that's fine. So it'll save it. So it's saved something over here. Cool. So now I can jump back to Cinema, and I'll make a new material, and we'll call this bottle label 1. And then in here, in my color channel, I'm going to load an image. Okay. So we can see it, it's applied to this little preview ball thing. And if I apply this to my object, and I turn off line mode, we can see that my label is sideways. So, like I said, it'll be rare for you to nail it first try, but if you somehow do, then kudos, pat yourself on the back. So in that case, I've got a couple options of varying amounts of, I guess, difficulty. I can try to rotate my texture in Photoshop 90 degrees on the side. I could rotate my UV map so that way it's on its side, and then that way my image can be right side up. That might be a little bit easier to work in Photoshop instead of having to work like on a sideways canvas. Or I guess I could just like rotate the canvas, the rotate tool, and something like that. So whatever you think is easier to try to fix the issue, but I'm going to try to rotate the texture right inside of Cinema. So with the texture tag selected, is this going to work? Tag on UV mapping? Nope. Nope. Alright. So I'm going to try to rotate my UV map, because I want to solve this like the most kind of hardest, in the hardest fashion, just so that you guys kind of are experienced with it. So I'm going to rotate, and it's kind of rotating on its side somehow, but it's a little tricky to punch in a specific value, because here you can't hold down shift to snap in degree increments. It's kind of just guesswork, but I think there's a transform tab, and in rotate I think I can punch in 90. There we go. So that rotated this, but now, oops. Now it's not exactly positioned right. And again, this is kind of a hard thing to do, but I want to stay within the boundary there, and I'm going to move. I'm going to kind of just move this into position somewhere. So I think this might be a little bit too big. So I'm going to scale this down in Photoshop a little bit, because I just think it's a little bit too tall to be a label. Not much. I'm just not gonna shrink it down by much. But let's see if we can get that right. So in here, I'm just gonna rotate my canvas back to the way that it should be, and hit escape. And it froze. There we go. So I'm gonna shrink this down by maybe 5%. So I'm gonna try 95 by 95. And I'll just save this. And now back in Cinema, I should just have to reset, reload. There we go. So in the attribute slot of the texture, I just clicked reload and it updated. So now this is just a little bit shorter. The top up here isn't coming right up along the kind of edge of the slope. So I'm pretty happy with the placement of that. And that's pretty much it. That was quite a lot.